Hello and welcome to Fresh Takes AMA with Dr. Wagner. I am Dr. Wagner, your friendly guide to human flourishing. And on episodes like these, you can ask me anything about supplements, biomarkers, food, movement, sleep, stress, and connectedness. And I'll do my best to answer. We had a couple of questions come in from Instagram this week, and then a few from Lab IQ, which is a Facebook group I co-moderate with Dr. Alan Hopkins, founder of yourlabwork.com. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Jer because he's got the questions.
I sure do. Let's just get right into it then. Samantha, via Instagram, Samantha asks, what's the best brand of DHA?
Yes. Okay, well, the best brand of DHA is Caviar. Haha. But if you're talking about supplements, I take Jarrow krill oil, Jarrow krill oil right now because it's pure phospholipid-rich krill oil and isn't diluted with any triglyceride-rich fish oil. And manufacturers do that a lot to inflate the DHA numbers with triglyceride. I'm homozygous for ApoE4. That means I have both the paternal and the maternal gene for that, so you can't get any more positive than that. So I want to maximize my phospholipid DHA in particular. But if you're not ApoE4 carrier, your options are much wider. Any quality fish oil or algal oil should be fine. I like Nordic Naturals. That would be a good place to start. So there are a number of quality products out there. But again, food is king, really. Caviar is amazing.
That's right. All right. Also via Instagram, the family naturopath asks, any thoughts on cod liver for people who don't or who won't eat fish or won't? I am a huge seafood advocate, but a lot of my clients are picky eaters.
Yeah, so cod liver oil, again, doesn't solve the phospholipid issue for ApoE4 carriers, but it is a great source of triglyceride-rich DHA and EPA for everyone else. And it's a terrific source of preformed vitamin A and D3 as well, which you don't get with regular fish oil. And it can taste actually really good if it's the right brand, like Carlson's or Nordic Naturals. It swallows easily on a spoon as opposed to pills. I think it's a great choice.
All right. All right, moving ahead, Lori asks, a study came out not too long ago saying that fish oil had no effect on preventing heart disease. My husband's cardiologist told him he could stop taking it. The only reason he was taking it was for his heart. Can you comment?
Yes, I think the study you're referring to came out this year in the New England Journal of Medicine, where they looked at supplementing 1,000 milligrams of omega-3s per day along with 2,000 international units of vitamin D. And then they looked at the risk of heart disease and invasive cancer in men over the age of 50 and women over the age of 55. And of course, they found no difference in the outcomes. And so doctors are now extrapolating from this to mean that these nutrients are of no benefit whatsoever.
Of course.
Right? Yeah. So the thing about this, though, is that if you look at the way most functional medicine practitioners practice, they would find this dose in the study to be quite low because they typically use 3,000 milligrams a day of omega-3 supplements to move the biomarkers around, because we know in that setting that omega-3s can reduce hsCRP, which is a big marker of inflammation. They can increase HDL. They can change your small, dense LDL into large, fluffy LDL. We can talk more about that later. Essentially change you from a pattern B to a pattern A, so a lower cardiac risk profile. Omega-3s are also can lower triglycerides. Kind of the more you take, the lower your triglycerides can go. So as far as heart health goes, I think the jury is out because I think these studies are just underdosed. There is another wrinkle here, though, because we know from cross-sectional studies that fish consumption seems to be very strongly correlated with both heart health and brain health. Whereas the fish oil studies continue to be a mixed bag, and certainly there's this issue of dosing that I just discussed, but there's also new research that sheds some light on why real food may matter more than supplements. I talked about this in our last Fresh Takes, but new research by Dr. Rhonda Patrick, PhD, is noting that DHA has a hard time crossing the blood-brain barrier in folks with ApoE4, which is a risk factor for Alzheimer's because it changes the way that barrier works a little bit, unless the DHA is in phospholipid form. But the vast majority of fish oils and algal oil is no exception either. they only provide DHA in its free fatty acid form or triglyceride form, which appears to be fairly useless in people with ApoE4. Krill oil does have naturally high levels of phospholipid omega-3s, both DHA and EPA, about 40% of the total weight. So that's promising, but the standard dose is usually pretty low in krill oil supplements. It's 8 times lower, for example, than it is in just a single 1 ounce serving of fish caviar. So it may be much more efficient to get this particular form of DHA from food rather than from supplements, at least when it comes to brain health vis-a-vis Alzheimer's disease. And there might be something similar going on here with heart health as well, which is why we see the big difference between eating fish and taking fish oil, and why those two don't seem to be matching up in the literature so much, in addition to the dosing issue. So bottom line is eat real food, use supplements as supplements, not as replacements for food. And see my previous episode of Fresh Takes, Vegan No More, my response to Anne Hathaway's announcement in People magazines that she suddenly felt like a computer rebooting when she started eating fish again.
Good for the brain.
Yeah.
All right. Lynn asks, how do you lower small, dense LDL?
Small, dense LDL. Okay, let me define this for a second here. So small, dense LDL is the LDL that we think is causing most of the problems in plaque buildup in the arteries. There's large, fluffy, and then there's small, dense. And basically that means out of your total LDL particle number, a certain number of them are going to be light and fluffy, and a certain number of them are going to be small and dense. The small, dense ones are the ones that have spent the most time circulating throughout your body, because they've offloaded most of what they were carrying. So they were carrying cholesterol, they were carrying phospholipids, they were carrying fatty acids, and delivering them to tissues that need those things. And so as they go throughout the body and deliver those things, they become smaller and smaller and smaller. So the small, dense LDL is the LDL that's been in circulation the longest and the most likely to get oxidized and lodged then in your blood vessels and start to cause problems, plaque buildup. So you want the small, dense LDL to be low, and that means that the liver needs to be clearing those small, dense particles effectively, and that can be influenced by all kinds of diet and lifestyle factors and genetics. Bottom line, if you want to have some leverage over your small, dense LDL, there are a couple things you can do. Number one, you can lower your refined carbohydrate intake, especially sugar. You can, number two, omit trans fat and consider lowering your intake of saturated fat, especially if you are ApoE4 positive, because that can make you a little less likely to be clearing those small, dense LDLs very quickly. If you have, number three, if you have diabetes, you need to keep it under very tight control, because any prolonged elevations in blood sugar are going to be glycosylating and damaging those small, dense LDLs and making them more likely to stick in your arteries. And number four, if you're obese, you got to lose weight, because central adiposity is like mainlining fat directly into the portal circulation. So all that belly fat is actually drained by the main vein. There is the portal circulation and goes directly into the liver and diminishes its ability to clear LDL particles from the blood just through mass action. Plus, this central fat is inflammatory fat. It contributes to systemic inflammation, which then damages these small LDL particles and makes them, quote, stickier and more likely to lodge in the intima and become a nidus of inflammation and plaque formation there. And the stronger your family history of cardiovascular disease, like if you have heart attacks before the age of 40 in your family, the more important all these things are to take seriously. And I think there was another question in here somewhere. There was one about triglycerides before we get away from the heart that we should ask. It looks like, is there one from Daniel? I'm looking through these. Did you see that one?
Oh, did I skip that one?
Yeah.
Daniel. Okay. Didn't go down one too far. We cut back to that one. Daniel asks, why do some people's triglycerides go through the roof when they go on a plant-based diet?
Yeah. Why? That seems counterintuitive. So elevated triglyceride levels are often associated with elevated simple carbohydrate intake. So depending on how well somebody is implementing a plant-based diet, this could be an issue. I mean, after all, sugar is plant-based. Mouthfuls of milled carbohydrates are plant-based. Fruit juices, stripped of all their fiber, are plant-based. And all of these things are potential dietary pitfalls for someone who may be evaluating their food choices strictly on the basis of whether they are plant-based or not, without considering any quality the form, the physiologic impact of these foods. So in other words, the term plant-based can create a sort of halo effect around damaging foods that directly impact triglyceride levels. And honestly, I used to see this more often than you would think in vegans when I was in practice. Because as a doctor, I found it really easy to assume that patients who were disciplined enough to go vegan would automatically know all about sugar metabolism, but they don't. And why should they? Most people are looking for very simple rules of thumb to navigate a very confusing modern food landscape. And so the term plant-based has now become the simplest and only rule of thumb for many of us. And we're human beings. We are what we are. We're these heuristic machines. We're always looking for kind of an easy way out, and we have to constantly educate and re-educate ourselves to come back to a position of nuance with everything. And so that's why I prefer the term choosy, as in choosy omnivore, choosy vegan, choosy plant-based enthusiast, whatever, because you still have to make wise choices within your dietary paradigm. And this is essentially the omnivore's dilemma that was articulated so well by Michael Pollan several years ago. And going vegan doesn't absolve you of this dilemma. You still have to make choices at every meal and choose wisely among your plant-based options. Never let your ideology trump your biology. Never be pacified by your paradigm, and that goes for people who are paleo just as much. And they can think, oh, meat is in, so I'm all in. Maybe not. So always be thinking, always be choosy, and your body will thank you. And in this case, your triglycerides will thank you for choosing a diet that it does not feature simple plant-based carbohydrates, but whole foods.
Very good. Okay, so we did Lynn, and now we're down to, looks like Win. Win asks, what does it mean if you have high leptin?
Okay, so leptin is a satiety hormone, and if it's high when you measure it, it can depend on why it's high. There are different reasons, but if someone's not at their ideal body weight, then leptin is most likely high because they've become leptin resistant. You've heard about insulin resistance. Well, you can also become leptin resistant, and that means they have to produce more leptin in order for their brain to get the satiety message, like, hey, I'm full, I don't need to keep eating. Because see, fat cells secrete leptin to signal that they are full. The problem is the fatter the fat cells are, the more leptin they secrete, and then the body's kind of like, I've heard this before, and it stops listening. So leptin is the body's way of telling your brain that you have ample energy stores and you don't need to eat so much. So it's a satiety hormone. But once you get into this feed-forward cycle of leptin resistance, like more leptin, more resistance, more leptin, more resistance, it's really hard to break that cycle, because just eating less and moving more will make you feel ridiculously hungry, much hungrier than someone who doesn't have leptin resistance. And that's why all the advice out there to just eat less and move more backfires so often, because it is so ridiculously difficult in these situations where biology has gotten wound up the wrong directions. So it's really helpful to look at other reasons why leptin might be high that you can get some leverage over first before you start eating less and moving more. And it turns out that one of those things is sleep. Everybody ignores sleep. But if you're not sleeping, so if you're getting less than 7 hours of quality sleep each night, or if you're a shift worker with circadian rhythm disruption, it will be exceptionally hard for you to do anything about the belly fat or the inflammation that comes with it, because poor sleep is going to sabotage almost everything you do. So I think sleep is the unsung hero here. It's the most ignored in this equation, and it's definitely something to investigate in getting your leptin levels down. Hormones regulated, your satiety hormones regulated a little better first before you tackle the eat less, move more thing.
Right. Yeah, sleep before you resort to just pure willpower.
Right.
Preston asks, can you still do keto if you need to reduce saturated fat?
Yeah, so most people know that a ketogenic diet features a lot of fat so that you convert the fat into ketones. But usually people are eating a fair amount of saturated fat, which has had some mixed reviews over the years. there's some people think it's not a problem anymore, and some people think no, it is still a problem in certain populations. I fall into the latter camp because I do think that there are conditions under which, some genetic conditions under which you become saturated fat sensitive, and we could talk about that here. And it can affect the way you do your keto, or if you can, or how you fast. So the answer is yes, you can still do keto if you need to reduce saturated fat, and you can do it through achieving a sort of cyclic ketosis using monounsaturated fats like olive oil, and then all the polyunsaturated fats, and then and combining that with intermittent fasting. And I've spoken about this before, doing sort of the 16-8, where you're 16 hours of fasting and then 8-hour feeding window, because not only is ApoE4 in the mix here, but there's another gene that we've discovered called PPAR alpha. And a single nucleotide polymorphism in that gene will actually demand that you eat more polyunsaturated fats and fewer saturated fats in order for you to even activate ketosis. And my good friend Alex Swanson over at Nutrition Genome, he explains this really well in a post I'd love for you to read. It's called "Is the Keto Diet Right for You?" over at Nutrition Genome. Basically, he makes a point that PPAR alpha is a gene that plays a major role in fatty acid metabolism, apolipoprotein production, HDL, LDL, and ketone body production during episodes of fasting. So if you have these variants in the PPAR alpha gene, it may cause a lower production of ketones while you're trying to fast and make that fast absolutely miserable for you. So you have to stimulate the gene and not inhibit it. And it's inhibited by saturated fat and stimulated by omega-3 fatty acids and healthy omega-6 fatty acids like in nuts and seeds. It's also stimulated by astaxanthin found in wild salmon, crab, shrimp, krill, by taro steel beans found in blueberries, mulberries, cranberries, raw almonds, and zinc, which is high in seafood, tomatoes, lion's mane mushroom, fermented soy. So what's really interesting about this gene is that not all saturated fats appear to be created equal. Coconut oil, for example, which is a tropical saturated fat, does not seem to negatively affect PPAR alpha as much as other long-chain saturated fats, like from butter, for example. So in Alex's opinion, these variants sort of point towards a gene pool that came from more coastal cultures that were adapted to higher omega-3 intake from seafood and lived in more temperate climates where there was a more consistent food supply. So our ancestral genetics make a big difference, and just going back to a paleo may not quite explain everything, because wherever your most recent ancestors were from, like in the last 1,000 years or so, can cause these little differences in your ability to produce ketones on traditional higher saturated fat intake. So PPAR alpha, ApoE4, those are both genetic reasons why you might want to decrease saturated fat intake, increase omega-3s and healthy omega-6 sources, and then try a combination of that plus monounsaturated fats and fasting to get to your cyclic periods of ketosis.
All right. Teresa asks, is coconut oil bad for you?
Okay, yeah. So look, if you don't carry the ApoE4 gene, I really see no problem with coconut oil in moderation. It's certainly better for high heat cooking than other plant-based alternatives that feature fragile omega-6s, or God forbid, hyper fragile omega-3s like canola oil. Oh, please deliver me. I mean, you could make the argument that we shouldn't be doing any high heat cooking at all, and that would be a fair enough argument. But to just brush aside coconut oil without highlighting the problems of the oils that people are likely to use instead of coconut oil is, in my opinion, nutritional malpractice. I mean, and I've written
So you're saying the tar or whatever, that's not a technical term, but like whatever it is from those omega-3s that when it burns is more toxic than just the saturated fat to begin with?
Yeah, you're basically creating trans fats in your pan when these omega-6s and omega-3s get too hot. They're not stable oils. I mean, they may be good for you in sort of raw, low temperature settings, but that's not how people are using them. Particularly not they're cooking with canola oil, which advertises itself as a high omega-3 oil, which, in my opinion, disqualifies it as a good cooking oil.
So it's for salad dressings.
It should be for salad dressings. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't go cook with fish oil, because when you think about the
That's true. Think about smell good.
Yeah, right. Think about the care that fish oil manufacturers put into keeping oxygen away from their product so it doesn't oxidize, because that's how fragile it is. Putting it in dark in dark bottles, so it doesn't even get any
Sunlight.
radiation from the sun, because that oxidizes those fragile omega-3s. That's how fragile they are. They have a shelf life. When's the last time you saw canola oil treated that way? It's out on the shelf in a plastic bottle in a full sun, and the only reason it doesn't smell terrible is because it's been deodorized. So like, it's a triumph of marketing over biochemistry, and just I can't stand it, actually, when I look around and see how successful it's been as a cooking oil. But anyway, so back to coconut oil. Like, if you're going to say that coconut oil is bad, you have to talk about what the alternatives are and make sure you mention those two. Otherwise, I think you're picking and choosing and committing a little bit of nutritional malpractice there.
All right, yeah, and then just anecdotally, I noticed at the coffee shop by my house now, they are selling bulletproof coffee on the menu, which to me is just a triumph of coconut oil to the masses. It's actually on the menu.
Yeah, right, exactly. And bulletproof coffee often involves coconut oil and or MCT
Butter
oil, which is a subfraction of that, plus plus some butter usually. Yeah, and those are all mostly saturated fats, and again, that can be a problem for certain people.
So yeah. Interesting. All right, so we got another one here. Nancy asks, what's the best lab marker for determining your Alzheimer's risk?
If I had to pick one, it would be ApoE4. I mean, that's the most important genetic biomarker for Alzheimer's. And here's how the risk breaks down by genotype. So if you have 2 copies of ApoE4, if you are homozygous like me, you have the paternal and the maternal, then you are anywhere from 50% to 90% increased risk of lifetime risk of developing Alzheimer's, all other things being equal, but all other things are not equal. We'll get to that. If you have 1 copy of ApoE4, if you're heterozygous, you have a 30% lifetime risk of Alzheimer's, and all other combinations of ApoE2 and 3 give you a 9% lifetime risk. But see, the thing is in reality, there are dozens and dozens of important biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease, because it is a multifactorial disease. It does not have to be determined by a single gene like ApoE4. So everything from your vitamin D status to your testosterone status to heavy metal burden, it's all important to look at and optimize. And I would encourage anyone to read The End of Alzheimer's by Dr. Dale Bredesen for his full cognoscopy, he calls it, which is a large battery of biomarkers to look at. And I think that's all the questions we have.
That's all for today, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Really appreciate it. Continue to encourage people that are watching to submit questions either via Facebook or Instagram. Somehow get them to us, and we'll try and include them on future sessions. Thanks a lot.
Yep, thank you.